You people don't fight for the truth. You dig it up just to bury it again. That's what Luther Creed told her right before her home burned, before her daughter stopped trusting her, before every secret her father died protecting clawed its way back to light. Now a single mom with nothing left to lose walks straight into the mouth of everything they tried to hide. Truth has teeth. Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below, we'd love to hear from you. The envelope had slipped halfway under the front door, curling like it didn't want to be seen. Callan bent to retrieve it, knees popping louder than she wanted to admit. Cold air snuck in through the crack below the frame. Her fingers brushed the paper, it felt thin official. The smell of scorched metal drifted in from the kitchen. Again, that damn oven was wheezing like an old dog, ticking, then sputtering, then letting out a high-pitched whine. Third time it broke this month. She tapped the top of it with the flat of her palm, not hard, just annoyed. It hissed in reply. "May!" she called toward the hallway. No answer. Just the muffled thump of bass-heavy music leaking from her daughter's room. The kind that felt like it never breathed. Callan exhaled slowly. No time to argue. She nudged aside a chair to reach the cluttered dining table, her laptop half buried under unopened bills and a sock. With a few quick taps, she pulled up her inbox. The newest subject line blinked like a warning flare. Request for payment denied. Her hand hovered on the mouse. Contract dropped. The only steady freelance gig she'd scraped together this quarter gone. Rent was due in 10 days. The hallway mirror caught her as she moved. She didn't look at it long, just long enough to clock the creased shirt in the shadow under her eyes. She hadn't washed her hair since Tuesday, or maybe Monday. She grabbed her jacket from the hook by the door and walked out without saying another word. Mrs. Winchell's store smelled like lemon cleaner and old onions. The bell above the door tinkled as Callan entered, and the older woman peeked out from behind a shelf of canned peaches. "Well, if it isn't little Silas," she said, squinting through her bifocals. "Heard about your daddy. Shame, really. But I suppose that land up on Cold Hill's yours now, huh?" Callan didn't answer at first. She placed a half-gallon of milk and a can of coffee on the counter. "Not planning on keeping it," she said flat. Mrs. Winchell gave a small hum, the kind people make when they want to say more, but pretend they don't. "Folks always said he was a strange man. Always digging, always looking like he was about to say something big, then never did." Callan counted out crumpled bills from her coat pocket, thanked her without looking up, and left. Back home, May was poking around the freezer. She pulled out a plastic container and sniffed it skeptically. "Stuff that stays frozen too long gets that weird burnt smell," she muttered. "Like Grandpa." Callan paused mid-step, one hand still on the doorframe. May didn't look at her. The girl's voice was even detached, like she was talking about a pair of shoes that didn't fit. Callan said nothing. There was nothing neat to say. On the dining table, the envelope from earlier lay atop the rest of the day's mail. She opened it slowly, careful not to tear the paper. Inside, photocopied deeds maps, signatures she recognized but hadn't seen in years. A yellow sticky note clung to the last page, written in quick, narrow script. Must be signed in person. No proxies. Her stomach tightened as she read the line again, the words dragging her toward the one place she didn't want to be. The folding chair creaked beneath her as she shifted, arms crossed tight. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly pale wash across the community center's panel walls. Half the town had crammed into the room: shopkeepers, retired miners, teenagers slouched in hoodies drawn in by the promise of a future paved with concrete and cash. At the front, a poster board displayed a proposed blueprint, Route 42 expansion. The red line cut straight through the land she had inherited. "And that brings us to the final agenda," announced Chairwoman Dorsey, flipping her clipboard. "Parcel C-117, the Rise property." Callan cleared her throat. "I don't consent to sell." A pause. Not silence, papers rustled. Someone coughed, but the kind of pause that weighed more than it lasted. "I haven't had time to evaluate the land fully," she continued. "My father left it in unclear condition, and frankly, I'm not signing anything until I understand what's out there." A man in a tailored blazer rose 2 rows down. Silver cufflinks glinted as he adjusted his collar. "Ms. Rise," he began, voice smooth like brushed steel. "I'm Luther Creed with Vanguard Resource Group. We're prepared to offer 3 times the current market value. She didn't move. He smiled wider. But let me be honest. If you refuse, this town forfeits its only chance to pull itself out of the mud. No bypass, no commerce, no jobs. We all lose. From the back, an elderly voice cracked through. Her daddy tried to sue Vanguard a few years back. After that, no one saw him again. Heads turned, murmurs, spreading like spilled oil. A councilman leaned forward, lips tight. Your father's name still echoes here, Ms. Rice. People remember the lawsuits, the noise. We don't need that kind of shadow crawling back. Callan's jaw clenched. Eyes flicked to the left, then the right, every stare landing sharp like small knives finding their marks. Not one familiar face met her halfway. A staffer approached from the side, handing her a sealed envelope. From Silas Rice's attorney, he said, "Delivered this morning." She opened it, thumbing through crisp papers that smelled faintly of basement dust. The top page bore her father's unmistakable scrawl. Attached was a hand-drawn map. At the bottom corner, circled twice in red, sat a symbol, 2 concentric rings and a diagonal slash. Luther stepped closer. "May I see that?" Callan folded the pages without blinking. "You may not." The edge in his voice thinned. "You're not helping yourself." She stood, slipped the file into her bag. "Didn't come here to help myself." Chairs scraped the floor as she walked out, the air behind her, thick with judgment, the heat of unspoken blame, pressed to her spine. In the car, she sat with the door half open, cold air pressing in through the crack. The map lay unfolded on her lap. Her fingers traced the red mark. The location matched a cave she'd hiked past as a child, long sealed, long forgotten. Some whispered it had been used during the Civil War to stash weapons. Or bodies. Her father's handwriting, slanted and urgent, pulled at her chest until she started the engine again. She parked just beyond the rusted fence line and climbed the incline in borrowed boots, the ground still soft from last night's rain. The hill wasn't much, just a long swell of earth rising behind a patch of birch trees, pale and peeling under the early autumn sun. At the top, a slanted gate of chain link sagged on one hinge, marking the path toward the cave. At the top, a slanted gate of chain link hung crooked on one hinge. She stepped over it easily. The air cooled the moment she passed into the shadow of the ridge. A cluster of mossy stones marked the old cave entrance, covered now by a sagging lattice of plywood and caution tape faded to white. She crouched, brushing aside a layer of wet leaves. Her fingers ran over the ground, searching for what exactly? A loose plank, a hidden latch. The silence hummed in her ears. A branch cracked behind her. "Thought I saw your truck down the road," a voice said, half curious, half amused. She turned, squinting into the light. Jace Hollowell stood 10 feet back, hands tucked into the pockets of his field jacket, hair longer than she remembered, but the posture was the same, shoulders slightly crooked, like he never quite trusted the weight of a full breath. He nodded toward the boarded-up cave. "So, you think there's gold under there, or just some redemption for your old man?" Callan rose slowly, brushing dirt from her jeans. "What are you doing out here working?" he said, lifting a small camera from his shoulder. "Or pretending to. Small towns don't feed journalists anymore. They just tolerate us." He paused. "You didn't answer my question." She didn't. Instead, she pulled her coat tighter around her, the folded map rustling inside the lining. Jace tilted his head. "He used to send letters to the paper, you know. Handwritten. Long rants about chemicals in the water and how something under Cold Hill didn't want to stay buried. He sent me grocery receipts," she muttered, "and once a key to a box that didn't exist." Jace shifted his weight. "Still came back, though." "That doesn't mean I believe him," she said quickly. Too quickly. She caught herself. The wind picked up, pulling loose strands of her hair into her mouth. She turned away to hide the tremble in her hands. Jace didn't push further. He just watched her like he was reading a sentence she hadn't finished writing. As she walked back to the truck, he didn't follow. Only called after her once. "Be careful, Callan. Some things get buried for a reason." At home, the air felt heavier than it should have. May's voice echoed from the kitchen. "Mom, what's this?" Callan's heart dropped. May stood over the dining table, her fingers pinching the corner of a small black USB stick. A mess of old documents and files lay spread out. Callan's bag, dumped open, her folders rifled through. "I was just looking for my headphones," May said, eyes wide but defiant. "This fell out." Callan snatched it from her. "You don't go through my things." May crossed her arms. Then maybe talk to me instead of treating me like one of your unpaid bills. Callan stared at her for a second too long, then turned away, the stick gripped tight in her palm. Later that night, she sat at the kitchen table laptop, opened the only light coming from the screen. She inserted the USB and waited. A single file blinked to life. Recording do3dum silas.mp4. She hesitated, then clicked. Silas appeared on screen, older than she remembered him, face more sunken, voice raspier than it had ever been when he read her bedtime stories. He sat alone in the dim of a wooden room, backlit by a flickering lantern. His eyes looked straight into the lens. If you're seeing this, he began, then it means they've come back, and you're alone. Callan didn't blink. You were always smarter than me, he said. So listen now, don't let them touch what's under there. Not the land, not the truth. They'll try to dress it up like opportunity, but it's rot. It's rot in a suit. He paused, swallowed hard, and leaned in, eyes narrowing. They erased me. Don't let them erase you. The video cut off with a low crackle of static. Callan slammed the laptop shut, chest tight, the blood in her temples pulsing loud enough to drown out the fridge hum. Her hands stayed braced on the table long after the screen went dark, until the vibration of her phone snapped her upright. A new photo had come through, grainy, low-res, but unmistakable. Jace had snapped it from an archive drawer in the Cold Valley Records back room. A motion-blurred hand clutched a piece of paper, stamped "Rejected" in red ink. Beneath the stamp, Plaintiff Silas Rice. Grounds: environmental tampering, unlawful excavation, obstruction of public health. Case dismissed for lack of verifiable physical evidence. The caption below read only, "They buried more than his name." Callan stared at the screen longer than she meant to, fingers hovering above the keyboard. The official tone of the dismissal struck something raw, something old and splintered that hadn't fully healed since the night they told her he'd wandered off into the woods and probably meant to. She grabbed her keys. The road to Silas's cabin wound through brush so dense the truck doors scraped against branches on both sides. She parked where the gravel thinned and continued on foot. Dead leaves scattered across the moss-covered steps. The lock on the front door was rusted but unbroken. She twisted it gently, pushed the door open, and crossed the threshold. Time had stopped here. Blankets still folded on the arm of a faded plaid couch. Coffee mug on the table rim stained. The scent of cedar and mildew thick in the air, like the woods had started creeping in and never left. She didn't turn on the lights, just let the gray morning seep through the cracked blinds. On the desk by the window, beneath a stack of yellowing maps, she found it rolled parchment, hand-labeled in thick pencil, subsurface grid proposal, Cold Hill. Unfurling it revealed a dense sprawl of overlapping tunnel shafts and forgotten lines that dipped under the ridge, some marked with red X's, others with question marks. But it wasn't the drawing that froze her. It was the single loose page tucked there, a torn sheet from a composition notebook the corner dog-eared. They've touched the hospital. She didn't die by chance, not an accident, not her. Below in sharper ink, a later edition, his wife. Her hand trembled. That phrase, his wife, it wasn't Silas's voice, not his tone. The handwriting didn't match. It slanted, harder, faster. Ink still newer than the rest. Someone else had read this and added to it. A floorboard creaked. She turned too fast, knocking over a chair, but nothing moved. Just the wind through the rafters. She clutched the paper and rolled the maps tight again, stuffing everything into her coat. As she pulled away from the cabin, headlights flicked in her rearview mirror. At first she thought it was coincidence, another truck headed toward town. But the vehicle didn't pass. A black SUV hovered 2 car lengths behind, never speeding up, never falling back. When she slowed, it slowed. When she turned, it did too. Callan took the long way home, looping through streets she hadn't driven since high school. Only when she pulled into her own driveway and watched the SUV idle at the corner for a beat too long before vanishing did she let herself breathe again. May sat cross-legged on the living room rug, arms propped against the coffee table, staring at the doorway as if she'd been waiting. Callan dropped her coat on the back of a chair. The map stayed hidden inside. May didn't move. Did you love Grandpa? The question struck like a stone to the chest. Callan reached for a glass, any glass, just to keep her hands occupied. May's voice followed. Do you think he died because of them? Callan stayed silent. Her throat refused to shape a lie. and the truth had no form yet. Later that night, after May was asleep, Callan sat at the kitchen table again, the laptop glowing in front of her like a dare. She slid in the USB. A second file appeared on the screen. Recording Shummeruiver de hiddenview.mp4. It opened on its own. Silas emerged once more, this time standing. The camera tilted from behind a cracked door just enough to catch him in frame. He argued with someone unseen, only half his words clear. Then a hand lunged out of the dark. He staggered back. The strike landed with a sickening crack, his shoulder smacking the wall. He stayed upright, eyes wide, lips parting in disbelief. Then the footage stuttered, frames breaking. No faces, only static, and the faint whir of a camera that shouldn't have been there. Callan snapped the lid shut, pulse hammering in places she hadn't felt alive in years. Her chest still heaved when a calendar reminder flashed in the corner of the screen, the council meeting she had almost forgotten. The town hall buzzed, low voices blending into the kind of restless hush that never lasted in Coal Valley. Folding chairs scraped, tile coats rustled, and the air carried the sour mix of rain-soaked wool and burnt coffee. Callan kept to the back, arms crossed, scanning the crowd. Neighbors, curious, wary, none offering welcome. At the front, Luther Creed adjusted his cufflinks with deliberate ease. Beside him, a display easel and a table stacked with binders. He radiated the polish of someone used to closing deals before dessert. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began, smoothly opening one of the binders. "As Vanguard Resource Group continues our commitment to economic revitalization, we've located long-overlooked documentation to help move forward with our development plan." He lifted a page with theatrical care. "A property transfer agreement signed by Mr. Silas Rice in 2003, granting us the legal rights to Parcel 7A. That includes the hill and all subsurface access." Callan stepped forward, heart pounding. "I've never seen that contract, and I've gone through everything he left." This wasn't among his effects. Luther frowned with calculated sympathy. "Not everything makes it into a will, Miss Rice. Perhaps your father didn't consider it worth mentioning once it was resolved." Her voice sharpened. "I want the document reviewed by an independent expert." He inclined his head, just shy of mockery. "Naturally, but you should know the notary Margaret Kellum passed away in 2021. The county office that housed her records shut down the year before. Authentication may prove impossible." Murmurs drifted through the room. A cough. Someone muttered, "Waste of time." Callan thought it came from the mayor's cousin. She drew breath to speak again when Jace brushed past. Without a word, he slipped a folded note into her hand and vanished through the side door like a shadow. She didn't open it until she was outside. Edith Gray, still alive. Old trailer on Canyon Loop. Used to notarize for the county. The paper smelled faintly of gasoline. She folded it tight, shoved it into her pocket. Her heartbeat ticked faster. When she reached home, the silence felt wrong. Not cold, not warm, just hollow, like the walls had been emptied of breath. The lamp in the corner leaned askew. May's jacket dangled crooked from the banister. "May," she called out. "In here." The voice came from the kitchen, small, distant, not right. Callan rounded the doorway and froze. May sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. Her eyes didn't move from the busted laptop lying in front of her. The device had been opened forcefully. The hinge cracked, the screen black. Plastic curled at the corner, where it had melted slightly near the USB port. "They were here," May said, barely above a whisper. "I came home and it was like this." Callan stared. Her chest ached with the sharp, hollow pain of loss, not of a person, but of truth, of proof. The files, the videos, all gone. Her fingers brushed the broken keyboard. They erased everything. May looked up slowly. Why, before she could answer, a loud thud hit the front of the house. Both of them jumped. A moment later, a gust of wind forced the back window open, rattling the dishes in the sink. Something slammed against the kitchen table and skidded across the wood, knocking over the salt shaker. Callan stepped back. May stood. A small black rectangle rested near the edge of the table, dusty, cracked, heavy. A dash camera. A piece of paper was taped to the top, written in uneven, rushed handwriting. "Watch yourself." Callan picked it up with both hands, flipping it over. Scratches lined the casing. The power button stuck but gave way under pressure. A red light blinked. May's voice was nearly inaudible. Is it from them? Callan didn't answer. She was already turning toward the cabinet, where she kept the old adapter, tugging tangled cords with shaking fingers. The walls seemed to press in as she forced the plug into place, the dash camera's red light flickering once before, burning steady. By the time she steered toward Canyon Loop, that same pressure clung to her chest. The trailer sagged under years of neglect, rust dragging down its frame, paint peeling like dried bark. The front steps bowed into a crooked angle. Callan hesitated at the threshold, one hand hovering above the bent handle of the screen door. Behind her, May leaned against the truck, arms locked tight, while Jace paced the roadside, scanning the tree line with restless glances. When the door creaked open, a pair of pale eyes glimmered from the dark inside. "You're Silas Rice's girl," the woman said, no question, just the weight of recognition softened by time. Callan stepped in. The air reeked of lemon oil and dust. Surfaces gleamed from care, yet nothing felt new. Edith Gray moved with effort, joints stiff, spine curved like a question mark. She gestured at the vinyl couch without looking. "He came here once, maybe twice," she murmured, lowering into a recliner. "Said he'd made a mistake signing something. Wanted it undone. Said they'd pushed him, that the contract wasn't the one he agreed to." Callan leaned forward. "Did you notarize it? I was supposed to, but I refused. The signature was wrong. Off." Her voice fell to a whisper. "He shredded the copy they gave him. Told me he buried the truth where no one would dig." She tilted her head toward a narrow closet. "He left something here. Said not to open it unless you came looking." Behind a stack of Reader's Digest magazines sat a wooden chest, no lock. Only wax seals carved with Silas's initials, heavy with the weight of secrets pressed into paper and ink. Back in the living room, Callan lifted the lid. The box held yellowed parchment, curled maps, a sealed envelope stamped "Confidential" in smudged blue ink. Jace leaned in, easing a sheet free. "These aren't mining records," he said, scanning the pages. "Court transcripts, deeds, letters. Most date back to 1864. Callan unfolded a brittle page, shaky handwriting still legible. "They built over the graves. They knew. The gold was never real. Just leverage. A story to cover the blood." Jace exhaled. If Silas was right, this isn't about property value. It's a buried scandal, cover-up, stolen land, maybe worse. Callan sank back, the chest resting heavy across her lap. The weight felt more than physical. May stood at the door, voice hushed. "You're not chasing treasure. You're chasing proof he wasn't crazy." Callan didn't reply. She brushed fragile edges with her fingertips, ink blurred by damp and time. The lies were old, the harm fresh. May stepped closer. "Are we going to the cave?" Callan hesitated a beat, then nodded. They moved wordlessly through the wood's branches, scraping their coats, three beams cutting through undergrowth. Mist clung low, the moon smothered by thick cloud. The cave mouth hid behind wild azaleas, fencing slumped in rusted warning. Silas had marked this place, but no one cared to notice. Callan crouched, her flashlight sweeping over stone. A faint white X still scarred the rock, weathered, stubborn. Jace tugged at his backpack straps. If they buried the story, it wasn't just to hide it. They wanted it erased. May's voice sharpened. "Then why leave all this? Why not burn it because they couldn't?" Callan murmured, staring into the dark below. "Some things won't stay buried." Her boots scraped the first rung of the ladder. Metal groaned beneath her weight. She glanced once at May, then at Jace, and climbed. The air thickened as they descended, damp with iron and stone. The walls pressed tighter with every step. Water dripped in a slow, hollow rhythm somewhere ahead. Behind her, May whispered, "It smells like iron." Jace lifted his beam toward the wet rock, voice low. "That's not iron." The thought trailed with them as boots slid over slick stone shadows, stretching like memories, reclaiming their ground. Deeper still, the light thinned. Callan steadied her flashlight, tracing its beam across damp sediment. Then she froze. A wall, flat, deliberate, unmistakably man-made, buried beneath centuries of moss and earth. Framed in limestone blocks, cracked and bleeding green, a chamber yawned open. The air inside pressed colder, heavier. May shivered without a word. Jace stepped forward, breath-catching, as his light revealed what waited within. In the center of the small chamber stood a rectangular steel box, rusted around the edges, but intact. Time had layered dust across every surface. Beside it, a stack of rotted canvas and brittle wood suggested someone once camped here or had tried to protect what they'd hidden. Callan crouched, hard hammering against her ribs. The box's clasp, sealed with melted wax, cracked open under pressure. Hinges moaned, and then letters. Dozens, if not more, packed tightly in bundles. Old paper yellowed and crumbling at the edges. Maps, official stamps, and at the very bottom, a leather-bound journal. She picked up the top letter. The seal read, "Confidential Ashford." Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the page. June 4th, 1866. The truth is buried beneath a flag. The depot was not lost, it was stolen, hidden. The gold was a myth meant to blind. What we guarded was shame and silence. If this reaches light, let it burn. Let it all burn. Jace let out a low whistle. Ashford, he was a colonel in the Union Army. They built a statue for him right outside the courthouse. May leaned over Callan's shoulder, squinting at the faded ink. He wrote this, looks like a confession, Callan said. Not just one man's regret, maybe a whole operation. A cover-up. She flipped through the stack, pulling out photographs, sepia faces, staring blankly ahead. Some wore uniforms, others suits. She didn't recognize any, but the caption on one caught her breath. Hadley, 1865, Union Affairs Division Office of Records. The letters and documents unraveled like thread. Accusations of false accounting, a forged deed, an underground facility sealed off, never logged. Testimonies that were silenced, one marked simply with the word removed. At the bottom of the journal, scribbled in urgent black ink, another line stopped her cold. They'll bury the land again if you let them. Truth doesn't rise without a fight. She stared at that sentence until it blurred. They packed what they could, wrapping the letters in fabric from Jace's backpack, careful not to tear anything. Callan took the journal and slipped it into her coat. As they climbed back toward the surface, no one spoke. Only their footsteps echoed. Back at the cabin, a fire crackled in the iron stove, casting a soft glow across the small living room. The cabin smelled of pine and smoke. May moved through the kitchenette, quietly fixing cocoa in 3 mismatched mugs. Her movements slow but deliberate. Callan sat on the floor near the window papers spread across an old quilt. The light from the lamp caught the edge of a map, illuminating handwritten notes tucked into its corners. She didn't read them yet, just sat, eyes scanning the curves and crossings of red ink like puzzle pieces waiting to click. Jace stirred his drink, standing near the table but not quite sitting. "You realize what this means?" "Yeah," Callan said, rubbing her fingers against her temple. "It means Silas wasn't paranoid. He was right." "Right, but also in real danger," Jace replied. "This isn't just about a land grab. If this leaks, it rewrites part of the state's history." May came over, offering her mother the steaming mug. "You think people will believe it?" Callan looked at her, hesitating. "They'll try not to." A rare quiet settled. Not fear, just the weight of knowing. The documents were safe for now. The truth was real. For the first time in weeks, Callan felt the storm in her chest calm slightly. Then a faint rumble, gravel shifting under tires. She stood up fast, moving to the window with practiced quiet. Headlights swept across the front yard. A matte black SUV parked without urgency, as if the driver already knew they'd be watched. Someone stepped out. Tall, wide shoulders, a long coat, a black hat, mask covering his face. Callan didn't blink. She let the curtain fall, turned to May, and nodded toward the bedroom without a word. The girl obeyed. She didn't reach for a weapon, didn't call Jace, just stood there staring at the floor, hands tightening into fists as the night pressed heavier against the windows. By the time her eyes snapped open again, something was wrong. The air felt thinner, the silence too tidy, too clean, as if the night itself had been wiped while she slept. She pulled on her coat and stepped into the main room of the cabin. It was ransacked. Drawers hung half open, their contents spilled like broken shells. The maps, letters, and every photograph Silas had stored gone. The iron lockbox had been pried open and left gaping. Not smashed, lifted, opened, emptied. No glass on the floor. No broken locks. Whoever came, they knew what they were looking for, and they knew how to leave quietly. Her phone buzzed with a name that shouldn't be calling. Jace, except when she answered, it wasn't his voice. "This is Nurse Whitley from Valley General," the woman said gently. Jace Hollowell was brought in early this morning. Car accident. Callan gripped the edge of the table. Is he conscious? Not yet, the nurse replied. Fractured wrist, cracked ribs, bruising to the face. It doesn't look like a normal crash. Before she could ask more, the line went dead. The drive blurred in her memory. The hospital walls felt colder than the mountains outside. Jace lay motionless under thin sheets, machines chirping at his side. His face was swollen lips, split one eye purple and sealed shut. A cop lingered at the end of the hall. When she asked what they knew, he only shrugged. Could have fallen asleep behind the wheel. Happens. There were defensive wounds, she pressed. Look at his arms. He blinked slow. Could have hit the steering wheel. Could have braced for impact. Not conclusive. You're not even going to investigate. He offered nothing, just turned and walked away. By the time she reached the cabin, dusk had soaked through the windows. The front door was closed, but the ruin inside clung like a bitter aftertaste. May stood near the fridge, arms, folded, eyes rimmed red. You always do this, she whispered. Wait until everything's wrecked. You don't stop anything, you just show up late and sweep ashes. I'm doing what I can. No, May snapped. You're doing what's safe. That's different. Callan didn't reply. Her legs carried her to the storage bin behind the fireplace. She dug through cords and dusty drives until her hand closed on one, marked with a fading red sticker. When she plugged it in, the screen stuttered once, twice before a folder bloomed. One file sat inside Valley Proof. She opened it. Silas appeared, hunched, his face more hollow than she remembered. His voice rasped, brittle as kindling. They tested chemicals in Cold Valley, he said. Told the town it was fertilizer runoff. But they knew. They logged the numbers, watched the cancer rates climb. Then they buried everything. He coughed, wiping his mouth. It was Vanguard. They made sure no records survived. Paid off the state board, smeared whistleblowers. And when I tried to speak, they laughed. He steadied his gaze on the camera. Callan, if you're watching this, they're already close. It's not just about land. It's about memory, about who controls what gets remembered. The feed broke into static. She gripped the desk edge, hands trembling. Heat coiled in her chest, not fear, but recognition. Behind her, May stood silent. They're not just burying documents, Callan murmured. They're burying people. May stepped closer, fingertips brushing her mother's arm. They buried Grandpa. The knock came sharp like bone snapping. Once, then again. Callan froze. May edged back. Another rap, measured, deliberate. She motioned for May to hide her own pulse hammering. The door creaked. A gloved hand pushed it open an inch. Nothing stirred beyond the crack until a lantern flickered through the trees, swaying in the wind. Behind it, a figure waited. Not advancing, not retreating. Long enough for Callan's breath to shallow. Long enough for the glow to fade as the figure stepped back into darkness. The silence that followed pressed heavier than footsteps. Then the phone buzzed once on the counter, a small tremor cutting the still air. Callan glanced at the screen. May's name, but the girl sat just across the room. May met her eyes, then tapped send. A video appeared in Callan's inbox. She opened it, frowning. The footage was grainy but clear. May had filmed that night in the cave. The chest, the documents. Silas's name scratched across brittle paper. Maps, military SEAL signatures. You filmed all this? Callan asked, voice low. May lifted one shoulder. You always say we need to keep receipts. For the first time in days, something shifted. Not much, but enough. A breath of space in a room that had felt locked shut. She forwarded the clip to one of Jace's old contacts, an editor at an independent investigative news outfit he'd freelanced for in D.C. A few minutes passed. Then a reply, "We've been looking for this. These match classified material lost in '63. You sure this is authentic?" She typed back one word. Yes. Another message followed faster this time. Send the originals if you have them. If this goes public, Vanguard's in trouble. Not just lawsuits, congressional kind of trouble. It was the first real foothold since everything had started sliding. That night they stayed at a small motel off Route 19. Neutral ground. The cabin was no longer safe, and the house back in town felt exposed. The next morning as they packed up to leave, a knock came on the motel door, not heavy but deliberate. Callan opened it just a crack. A man stood outside, hands open, no smile. Older, maybe early 70s, with sun-leathered skin and a nervous stance. "My name's Grant Corley," he said softly. "I was a fireman here back in '87. I knew your father." Callan hesitated. "Silas." He nodded. "He helped me. I never said it, not once. They scared the hell out of me back then." She opened the door wider. He sat across from her, eyes darting around the room. The smell of engine oil and tobacco clung to him. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the mug of gas station coffee May had poured. "I saw the reports," he said. "Knew what was happening, but I wasn't the brave kind. They paid off a bunch of us to stay quiet, made us sign things, threatened our pensions. Back in 2003, Silas came to me, asked if I'd testify. I couldn't." He swallowed hard. That man died thinking nobody'd stand with him. Callan kept silent, the unspoken weight thick between them. "But if there's a trial now," Grant went on, "I'll speak. I've kept copies of what I saw. Silas said someday his daughter would pick up where he left off. I didn't think it was true. Didn't think anyone would care." She took the worn folder he slid across the table. Names, chemical logs, orders, the same dates as those in Silas's notes. A horn blared, the courier van pulling up to the curb. The papers had to reach Charleston by dusk, filed as part of a federal injunction that would freeze all activity on the disputed land. Callan signed the envelope with a sharp, certain hand and passed it across. May leaned against the window, watching clouds shift over the parking lot. "Are we doing the right thing?" she asked. Callan didn't answer right away. Her eyes tracked the van as it wound down the road and vanished beyond the mountain curve. A gust of wind sent dust swirling through the motel walkway. Grant rose, pausing at the door. "Just remember," he said, "the truth has weight. So does the silence that tries to bury it." The latch clicked behind him. Callan studied her reflection in the TV screen, blurred, uncertain, but still upright. She bent to gather their things when May pointed to something wedged beside the motel mini-fridge, a thin black envelope with no stamp, no name. A folded photograph, slipped out, grainy, pulled from a security cam. Jace standing in the lobby of Valley General. The timestamp this morning. He wasn't supposed to be awake. He wasn't supposed to be walking. A red circle marked the corner of the frame where a man in a dark coat trailed close behind. Callan clenched the photo, its weight burning in her palm as the town council summoned her later that night. The projector buzzed, throwing shaky video across the whitewashed wall of the town hall. The room fell still. Every folding chair held someone, rigid, breath caught halfway. Silas Rice appeared on screen, older, weary. The light in his eyes dim but steady. His voice cut through the static, low but clear. "You think they'll stop if I stay silent? They're building graves, not highways." Then came the second voice, Luther Creed's, smooth, sharp, unmistakably cold. "You open your mouth again, old man, and I promise, you'll vanish like the last guy who tried." A murmur rolled across the room. Someone gasped. A chair creaked under sudden movement. Beverly from the grocery store leaned forward, her knuckles white around her purse strap. "Oh, God," she whispered. It was him. It was always him. Callan stood beside the table where she'd laid out copies of the documents, the Civil War letters, Ashford's confession, the underground survey, the footage of the hatches. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Luther Creed sat in the back row, legs crossed, one arm draped over the empty chair beside him. His eyes never wavered. Not a flicker of surprise, not a twitch of guilt. Just that practiced calm, like he'd already planned 10 steps ahead. Callan turned off the projector. She gathered the files in slow, deliberate movements, slid them into her worn canvas bag. As she turned to leave, she caught a final glance over her shoulder, and she saw it, the doubt. In the way a councilman lowered his eyes, in how a mother drew her child closer, in the hush that lingered after the footage cut out. Wind rushed through the oaks along Main Street, sharper now, or maybe she'd only just begun to feel it. She and May didn't return to the cabin right away. They stopped by the diner for takeout, May insisted, and took the long way home, looping through the valley. Maybe Callan was stalling. Maybe she needed to believe they had a little longer before everything changed. But when they reached the ridge, the fire had already begun. Flames clawed at the cabin's roof like fingers trying to tear the sky open. The structure groaned, timbers popping and splitting, windows bursting from the heat. Callan slammed on the brakes. Gravel spat beneath the tires. May threw the door open before the car had fully stopped running toward the blaze, before Callan caught her arm. "We weren't there," May gasped. "We could have been." Firefighters were already on scene struggling with the narrow access and low water pressure. One waved her back, shouting over the roar of collapsing wood. "Keep back, this thing's too far gone." Callan's mouth opened, then closed. Her hands trembled as she clutched May against her chest. The heat scorched their faces even from the tree line. A man in turnout gear approached. His face was streaked with ash. "Ma'am, best guess electrical short. Maybe the generator. Old wiring like that, all it takes is a spark." But she wasn't listening to him anymore. Across the road, parked just off the tree line, a black SUV idled with its headlights off. She saw it. She knew it. The same one that had followed her. Same silent threat, same nameless driver. She stared at it until it reversed slowly, wheels crunching over fallen pine needles, disappearing back into the woods without so much as a brake light. That night they checked into a motel near the county line. The room smelled like bleach and mildew, the carpet stiff with wear. May curled under the thin blanket without a word, back turned. Callan stood by the window staring at the reflection of her own face in the glass. Her phone buzzed an alert from the encrypted folder she'd sent to the journalist earlier. Download confirmed. Backup verified. The data was safe. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Behind her, May finally spoke. "He's trying to erase everything, isn't he?" Callan turned. The girl's voice was quiet, steady. "Not scared, just tired. Too tired for a 12-year-old. "Yes," Callan said. "But we still have the truth." May sat up. "Then we burn louder." Callan's breath hitched. She stepped over, crouched beside the bed, brushing soot from May's cheek with the edge of her sleeve. "We will," she whispered. The TV flickered in the background, local news anchor reading from a script. "A fire destroyed a remote residence near Coal Valley Ridge this evening. Officials are investigating possible electrical failure. No injuries reported." As the anchor moved on, the camera cut to a still shot of the cabin, glowing embers painting the sky behind it. Callan didn't look away. The image burned long after the screen went dark, and by the time she rose from the bed, her mind was already fixed on the only door left to knock. The floor-to-ceiling windows in Luther Creed's office looked out over a sweep of land Callan once called home. Mountains rolled like sleeping giants in the distance, but the glass between her and them felt thicker than walls. She didn't sit. He didn't offer a seat. Luther stood behind his sleek walnut desk, adjusting the cuff of his shirt like he had all the time in the world. On the polished surface, a thin manila envelope waited, too clean, too deliberate. "I assume you understand the value of time," he began, sliding the envelope forward. In silence. Callan didn't blink. "What's in there?" "A settlement," he replied, voice low and rehearsed. "The kind that makes everything go away. No more press, no more hearings. You and your daughter disappear into the comfortable quiet you both deserve." She stared at the envelope. Her hand twitched once, then settled back at her side. "I'm not here for money," she said. He smiled barely. "No one is until they realize the cost of being right." The air between them thickened. Callan's jaw locked. "How many families did you bury in paperwork, Luther? How many bought off or threatened?" He finally stepped out from behind the desk, taking his time circling her. "Only the ones who didn't know how to shut up," he said, pausing, just behind her shoulder. "And let me guess you're different." Her pulse hammered. She didn't flinch. She refused to give him that. "I'm not brave," she murmured, "but I've already lost too much to walk away now." Luther chuckled like she just told a child's ghost story. "You think they'll care, the people out there? You think truth matters to anyone in this town anymore?" She turned to face him. "I don't need them to care. I just need them to see." The elevator dinged behind her. She stepped out into the lobby without another word, the envelope untouched on the desk. Across the parking lot, May stood alone, arms crossed, shoulders tight beneath her hoodie. Her face didn't hold surprise, just disappointment, sharp and unspoken. Callan slowed, guilt dragging behind each step. "You followed me?" she asked. May's eyes didn't move from her mother's face. "I heard everything." Callan opened her mouth, then closed it again. Back at the motel, rain smacked the windows in erratic bursts. The air smelled of damp carpet and old tobacco. Callan tossed her keys onto the table, peeling off her coat without looking at May, who'd sunk into the edge of the bed, arms wrapped around her knees. "You think I'm going to take it?" May said flatly. No. You paused, the girl hissed. You didn't say no. You stood there and thought about it. I didn't, Callan began. You did, May's voice cracked too loud in the small room. You looked at that envelope like it was going to save us, Callan faced her. I looked at it like it was poison. You didn't throw it, May snapped. You left it sitting there like maybe it would fix things. Callan pressed both hands to her face, dragging them down slowly. You have no idea what kind of people we're up against. And you think I'm too young to get it? I know exactly what they are. They're the kind who make people like Grandpa disappear. And you're about to let them do it again. Stop. You were going to take it, weren't you? Callan didn't answer. Her silence cut through the air heavier than shouting ever could. May stood pointing at her with a trembling hand. You'd sell anything if it meant sleeping through the night. Grandpa, me, the truth, doesn't matter. The room pulsed with fury. Callan's throat ached from words she couldn't force out. She turned away, unable to meet her daughter's glare. The bed creaked as May collapsed onto it again, facing the wall silent. Rain rattled harder. Callan stared at the reflection in the black window pane, smudged makeup, salt-streaked cheeks, hair clinging to her forehead. But it wasn't the face that shattered her. It was the eyes. They looked too much like Silas's. And for the first time since he died, she admitted how much she hated that. A knock thudded against the door, 2 short taps, then 1 long. She spun around, eyes narrowing. May didn't move. Neither did Callan. Another knock. Her hand reached for the bat she'd kept beside the dresser since the fire. The rain had stopped. The room suddenly too quiet as she waited, breath caught until the silence stretched long enough to fray. Callan's fingers hovered above the keyboard. The hotel room still hushed except for the cold glow of the screen. She hadn't opened the door. Whoever stood there had left nothing but quiet behind, and now lines of file metadata scrolled past, modified dates, file paths, strange discrepancies she hadn't seen before. One entry blinked back at her. Video 1, final.mp4, created 2:12 a.m. Today modified 4:07 a.m. Today her blood chilled. No one else had touched her laptop. She'd set the password herself. She double-checked timestamps didn't lie. Behind her, the soft squeak of the mattress. She turned slowly. May was curled beneath the covers, wide-eyed, clearly awake. Callan didn't raise her voice. May. No response. She crossed the room in 2 steps and crouched down. You opened the file. The girl blinked quickly. I didn't mean to. What did you do? May sat up, arms wrapped around her knees. Her lower lip trembled. I sent it to someone. For help. Callan's lungs locked. To who, Mr. Kellum? She whispered. My history teacher. He used to be a lawyer. I thought he'd know what to do. Silence thickened. May shook her head, voice climbing in pitch. I didn't tell him anything bad, just the video and part of the transcript. I wanted him to read it. I thought he could help. Callan stared. The air left her chest in a slow, invisible collapse. May, she said, trying to stay steady, Kellum works for Vanguard. He was their legal rep during the zoning hearings. Don't you remember? The realization bloomed behind May's eyes, slow and nauseating. Her shoulders sank as she pressed her forehead into her palms. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't. But it was already too late. Callan's phone lit up. A string of notifications appeared, push alerts from local news outlets, forums, and a state-level watchdog blog. She opened one article with trembling hands. Silas Rise, the madman miner, exclusive new leaks suggest fabricated documents, falsified witness claims, and decades of conspiracy hoaxes. Photos of Silas, grainy and unflattering, sat next to quotes from anonymous legal analysts, discrediting every piece of evidence Callan had gathered. She didn't speak, just stood in the middle of the room, phone dangling loosely in her grip. May's voice cracked behind her. I didn't mean to ruin it. I thought I was helping. Callan didn't yell. She didn't slam anything or curse or cry. She just walked to the bathroom, shut the door quietly, and leaned over the sink, staring at her own reflection. Not even anger remained, just a cold, hollow vacancy that took its place. The phone vibrated again. She checked it. Jace H. voicemail 1. One new message. She hit play. His voice was raspy, half-whispered, probably still drugged from the hospital, but clear enough. If you've got anything left, anything they haven't touched, release it now. They're writing your father out of history. She shut her eyes. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the backup drive and scanned its contents. A handful of corrupted files, two mislabeled folders, one text document untouched hidden in a nested directory. She clicked. It opened. A confession letter, handwritten, scanned, signed not by Silas, but by Ashford, the Union colonel from the original documents. It detailed the use of Cold Valley as a test site for experimental munitions during the war chemicals dumped into the soil illnesses that followed, and orders from Washington to keep it quiet. The signature had been cross-verified in Jace's earlier notes, sealed by a forgotten archive in Ohio. Still here, untouched. Callan leaned back in the chair, heartbeat finally catching up to her breath. In the next room, May sat motionless, knees to her chest, watching the dark window, like it might forgive her. Callan copied the file onto a separate USB, then another, then a third. She stood, slipped one into her coat pocket, and paused at the door. May spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Are you leaving?" "No," Callan replied, not turning around. "I'm making sure someone hears the truth, even if no one listens." She set her jaw crossed back to the table and powered up the laptop once more. The upload bar inched forward across the screen, silent and deliberate, like something holding its breath. Callan sat motionless at the kitchen table, her laptop humming softly beneath her fingertips. Each second dragged as if the truth itself resisted exposure. May stood nearby, hugging her arms, her gaze fixed on the screen. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to discuss. When the bar hit 100%, Callan exhaled. She hadn't even realized she'd been holding her breath. She closed the lid gently and said, "It's done." May stepped closer, voice barely audible. "Where does it go?" "Everywhere," Callan replied. "They can't pull it back now." The files had gone to independent journalists, open-source databases, legal watchdog groups, even a few veteran forums, Silas once scribbled in his notes. Copies of the Civil War correspondence, images of the underground chamber video footage from the USB. All of it. Her father's voice, his fear, his truth. "Do you think they'll believe us?" May asked. "Some will, some won't." Callan picked up her coffee, now cold, and took a sip anyway. "But it's not about belief anymore. It's out there." A moment passed, then May looked up. "Can I say something too?" Callan raised an eyebrow. "To who they're doing a town assembly? At the school. People are talking about you, about Grandpa. Maybe they need to hear from me." Callan searched her daughter's face. She wasn't asking for permission. She was asking to be heard. An hour later, the gymnasium buzzed with low voices. The bleachers groaned under the weight of anxious neighbors. Old men with arms folded, mothers with toddlers fidgeting in their laps. No one looked certain why they were there, only that something had shifted. Callan stood at the back. May climbed the steps to the stage without a script. The microphone was too tall for her. She adjusted it with both hands, paused, and began. "My name is May Rice. I'm 12 years old. My grandfather was Silas Rice." A murmur ran through the audience. People called him crazy, said he made things up, that he was obsessed with secrets no one cared about. She swallowed, voice wavering just once before growing steadier. "But the stuff he found, it's real. He wasn't trying to get rich. He was trying to stop people from getting hurt, and he was trying to protect the truth." A pause. Callan could barely breathe. "I used to wish I wasn't related to him, that no one knew my name. But now I'm proud. Of him, of my mom, of everything they didn't give up." The room fell quiet, not out of shock but respect. One person clapped, then another. Soon the sound filled the space like rain breaking over dry ground. May stepped down, cheeks flushed, and walked straight into Callan's arms. No words exchanged, just an embrace that said everything they hadn't been able to before. That night, Callan drove alone to the hilltop. The road had been blocked, the area fenced with yellow tape and government warnings. She parked just before the barricade and made the rest of the way on foot. At the mouth of the old trail, she crouched, pulling a small lantern from her bag. The same oil lamp Silas once kept on his cabin windowsill. She lit the wick, waited for the flame to steady, then placed it at the edge of the earth. A soft glow spread across the grass, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. The air smelled of pine and ash and something old enough to be sacred. "You didn't die in vain," she whispered. "They can't bury it again." A shuffling sound behind her. She turned, hand instinctively moving to her phone, but it wasn't a threat. An older woman approached slowly, her frame thin beneath a quilted jacket scarf tucked tightly at her neck. Callan recognized her, Mrs. Emery, the former pharmacist who once filled Silas's heart medication. No one had seen her in months. "I saw your daughter today," she said, voice soft, eyes wet. Spoke like someone twice her age. Callan didn't respond. Mrs. Emery continued. "Your father came into my shop the week before he died. He tried to tell me about the water, the soil, said something bad was coming. I laughed at him." She looked down at the lamp. "He wasn't crazy, was he?" Callan shook her head slowly. The woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver key. "He left this for me. Said it was in case someone ever believed him." Callan took the key without speaking. The metal felt warm. Mrs. Emery nodded toward the light. "You stayed. Most people would have run." "I wanted to," Callan admitted. "But you didn't," the woman said. Then she turned, disappearing into the trees. Callan remained, the key resting in her palm, the flame flickering at her feet. She closed her fingers around it, already knowing it wouldn't stay hidden much longer. The headlines proved her right. Vanguard investigated for historical fraud. State officials confirm criminal tampering of land records. Whistleblower legacy ignites civil probe into Cold Valley land scandal. Callan sat in the courthouse parking lot. Windows rolled halfway down the late autumn air, threading gently through the silence. May sat beside her, fingers tugging at the hem of her sweater, eyes fixed on the courthouse steps. A week earlier, she'd walked into this building holding a single envelope. Now the building itself had started to shake. Luther Creed's arrest had come swiftly, no grand standoff, no drawn-out trial. Just a quiet morning, a pair of unmarked cars and a man in a pressed suit led away with his chin still tilted up like he owned the sky. He hadn't spoken, not even when the reporters shoved microphones into his face. He hadn't needed to. His silence was louder than any confession. May had watched the footage like it was a movie she'd seen too many times. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked. Callan leaned her head against the seat. "No." But it started to end. Vanguard's office in West Virginia had shuttered by state order. Employees walked out with boxes of files, most too afraid to speak. Some began leaking internal documents anonymously. Others claimed they'd known nothing. The truth in fragments was still assembling itself. Cold Valley didn't sleep much that week. At the general store, people spoke softer when Callan walked in. Not pity, caution, as if they realized too late they'd judged her wrong. At the gas station, a paper bag of cookies waited on her windshield with a note. "You made him proud." And now the town hall, the place where everything had first cracked open, had summoned her back. She hadn't known what to wear, so she hadn't bothered. Denim jacket, soft boots, hair caught with a clip too loose to hold much. It wasn't about blending in. It was about showing up. The wooden floor of the assembly room groaned under her steps. The same long table stretched across the front, but the faces behind it looked smaller now. Less certain. Some dropped their eyes. Others gave the faintest nod. May squeezed her hand tighter than needed. A chair waited beside the podium, her name handwritten on a folded card. She left it untouched. The room quieted as she moved forward. No one asked her to speak, and she had nothing rehearsed. For a moment, she only stood there, fingers brushing the edge of the wood eyes moving across the familiar crowd. The woman from the diner, the man who had once called her father, Dangerous, the boy in the back row gripping a toy flashlight. Words rose, faltered, dissolved. She looked at May, then stepped down. Applause didn't come at once. One pair of hands near the back, then another. The sound rolled forward slowly, not loud, not grand, but steady enough to hold her upright. Enough to remind her she wasn't alone. May leaned close. "You did it." Callan shook her head. "We did." Last light stretching long shadows across the street. They walked unhurried, passing houses that once felt hostile, now only hushed. By the library, a man held the door without a word, just a nod, respectful. Farther down, someone called her name, soft as a greeting. At the corner, the bulletin board carried a new plaque. in memory of those who kept the lantern lit. It didn't name Silas. It didn't have to. That night, Callan sat on the porch of their temporary rental wrapped in a wool blanket, sipping tea gone lukewarm. May lay curled on the couch inside her, breathing steady. The stars were out. She listened not for danger, not for whispers in the woods, or engines idling in the dark, but for the ordinary sounds of a town learning to be honest again. Footsteps crunched across gravel. She stayed still. A teenager from the neighborhood approached, clutching a thin stack of printed papers. "Miss Rise," he asked, nervous. She tilted her head. "I printed some of your dad's documents from that link. I'm doing a project on it for history class." Her chest tightened in a way she hadn't prepared for. He held out the pages. "Is it okay if I talk about him?" She took them slowly, fingertips grazing his. "Yes, talk about him." He smiled, walked off, whistling something old and low. The porch creaked as she sat again, letting the sound settle, already knowing where morning would take her. The cabin rose like a skeleton of memory, half-rebuilt ribs of wood-exposed nails, too new for their foundation. Callan crossed the open-frame boots, grinding sawdust and stray leaves. Morning light filtered through the beams, weaving crisscross shadows on the dusty floor. Someone had replaced the door, but not the lock. No reason to. The place smelled of pine and old ash. What hadn't burned had been swept aside or set carefully back in place. Callan paused at the small shelf that once held Silas's notebooks. Most were gone, reduced to char and flakes, but one thick volume, edges blackened, remained wedged under a warped floorboard someone had missed. She knelt and tugged it free. Pages clung together, brittle at the edges. Near the center, one sheet resisted, then peeled away to reveal handwriting nearly lost to the flames. Sometimes there's no one left to listen. Say it anyway. No greeting. No date. No signature. Just ink scrawled unevenly, the kind of line written with shaking hands in a room too quiet. Callan let her thumb rest on the page, then closed the book with care. In the corner, a splinter of scorched timber curled like a leaf. She broke off a piece the length of her finger and slipped it into her coat pocket. Not to bury, to carry. That evening, thyme and roasted onion lingered in the air. Callan moved softly between stove and counter, ladling stew into bowls, slicing the small loaf she had picked up that morning. May sat at the table, scrolling her phone, hair tucked behind one ear. Words weren't needed. Steam curled upward, filling the space where arguments used to live. It wasn't forgiveness, just rhythm returning, piece by piece. When they finished, May rose to clear. Callan reached for the faucet, her skin reddened by hot water breath misting the window pane. A breeze rattled the frame. Plates clinked as May stacked them. Then, barely audible, "You don't have to say sorry." Her fingers tapped the ceramic once. "You just have to keep doing what you're doing." Callan didn't turn, but something eased in her shoulders. Later, May curled on the couch, blanket tangled at her knees, earbuds in, but only one playing. Callan lingered in the hallway, the scorched wood steady in her hand, though she couldn't explain why she kept touching it. By the door, unopened mail piled bills, a town meeting flyer, another envelope from the journalist group asking for a follow-up. She ignored them all. In her room, windows cracked for a thread of air, her father's old flashlight waited on the desk. She clicked it on and off, once the beam thin but steady, a heartbeat of light. In the bedside drawer lay Silas's hiking scarf, the one she'd mocked. She traced the frayed end, then slid it beneath her pillow. That night, dreams carried no caves, no fire, no shadows. Only silence, clear, open, unthreatening. She woke at 3, padded to the kitchen, poured a glass of water. Sat on the cold tile, back to the cabinet, knees drawn up. Stars spilled pale over the lawn through the window. She didn't need the past to forgive her. She just had to stop trying to outrun it. Footsteps stirred the soft pad of May crossing the hall. Wrapped in a blanket, hair tousled, the girl appeared in the doorway. "You okay?" she asked, eyes squinting. "Yeah." Callan nodded, patting the floor beside her. "Come sit." May dropped down without a word. They leaned against the cabinet's, gazes fixed on the darkened glass. Neither spoke aloud what they were thinking, but both understood. Not every truth survives fire in words. What remains, what is carried, needs no explanation. It only needs to be held, and soon it would have to be laid bare before more than just the two of them. Rows of worn benches lined the state courthouse. The air inside felt filtered still too clean for the kind of dirt about to surface. Callan sat just behind the front row. May beside her knees locked fingers, clasped tight in her lap. The hearing had begun 2 hours earlier, but every minute felt heavy. The judge's voice remained flat, impartial, a tone sharpened by years of suppressing outrage. Pages flipped, microphones buzzed. One by one, representatives stepped forward with reports, maps, and timelines. Then came the state's closing remarks. The attorney's tie sat slightly crooked, his hair graying at the edges, but when he stood, his voice cut the room like a scalpel. Based on the investigation, he began adjusting his glasses. The court finds sufficient grounds to reopen case. 2003 CB 145, previously closed under sealed advisement. He turned, nodding toward the bench. Vanguard Resource Group is found to have violated 4 federal statutes, including unlawful toxic dumping, intimidation of witnesses, tampering with public records, and falsification of land transfer documents. A gasp fluttered through the room. Furthermore, the evidence submitted, most notably the archive recovered by Ms. Callan Rice and the Independent Journalism Coalition, demonstrates sustained efforts to erase public accountability. Callan glanced sideways as Luther shifted in his seat. The sharp cut of his jaw had softened over the weeks, but his eyes, those same cold, unreadable eyes, remained unblinking. When the judge spoke his name, he didn't even flinch. Luther Raymond Creed. The judge read, "You are hereby sentenced to 10 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." Papers rustled. A guard stepped forward. Luther didn't resist. He rose, buttoned his coat as though preparing for a meeting, and allowed himself to be let out. But just before the door closed, he turned his head ever so slightly, locking eyes with Callan. No hatred, no apology, just vacancy. She exhaled, long and quiet. The crowd spilled onto the steps. Journalists shouted questions. Cameras blinked like nervous eyes. Jay stood under a tree, his arm still in a sling. He lifted it weakly in a wave. Callan gave a nod in return. She didn't approach. May slipped her hand into her mother's and leaned closer. "So, that's it." Her voice barely cut through the buzz of traffic. Callan didn't answer right away. Later that week, a smaller gathering formed on the hilltop outside Cold Valley. There were no banners, no podium, just folding chairs, a thermos of coffee being passed around, and the wind pushing hair into people's faces. Edith Gray arrived early, clutching a woven shawl. Her name had been cleared publicly and with formal apology, but she didn't stand apart. She sat on a stone like the rest, quietly, the wind tangling strands of silver hair across her cheeks. May handed her a blanket wordlessly. Jace read from a short statement written by the journalism team. Their feature had gone live that morning, Those Who Once Stayed Silent. It trended online for 12 hours before corporate PR engines tried to bury it. But the words had already settled in. The truth had taken root. As the short memorial wound down, someone produced a black and white photograph of Silas Rice. Young hat tilted back, grin crooked. They rested it against a rough stone set into the earth. No brass plaque, no formal marker. Just a single hand-carved phrase, "The one who kept the key." Who kept the... Callan stepped forward last. She didn't speak. Instead, she bent down, placed the scorched wood shard from the cabin beside the photo, and brushed dirt from the rock's edge. Then she stood. A breeze whipped across the hill, tugging at coat hems and sleeves. People turned to leave one by one, shoes crunching dry grass, voices low, but content. Only Callan and May remained. She turned toward her daughter, unsure what to say. But May spoke first. He wasn't wrong. Just way ahead. Callan blinked, then managed a small smile. They stood there a while longer, arms linked, the sun dipping low behind the ridge. No applause, no speeches, just the sound of wind brushing past like someone exhaling after holding their breath far too long. A year had passed, but the wind still smelled like pine and old stories up on that hill. The Rise land no longer sat abandoned, no longer whispered about in the aisles of grocery stores or behind drawn curtains. It had a name now, painted simply on a wooden board nailed to the gate: Rise Center for Civic Study and Restoration. Most of the buildings were new but made with old hands, volunteers from town, local veterans, former students of Silas, who remembered the way he paced his porch barefoot, ranting about truth, like it was something you could bottle if you were fast enough. The land had changed, yet it hadn't. just grown into itself. In one corner of the main cabin, now refurbished into a learning space, Callan stood in front of a whiteboard covered in notes and diagrams. Her voice carried clearly, though never sharply. "This line here," she said, drawing a circle around a news headline, "is how they softened the scandal before it hit the front page. See that it's not just about the facts, it's about the order you tell them in." 5 women sat in folding chairs, all from the surrounding counties, mothers juggling part-time jobs, some with toddlers napping in the back room. They took notes, slowly pausing to ask questions, not because they didn't understand, but because they'd never been taught they were allowed to. Callan moved from one chair to the next, leaning down, listening. No platform, no speech, just steady work. In the corner, May hunched over a beat-up laptop. Headphones pushed her hair back from her face, the mic clipped to her hoodie. She wasn't recording the lesson, not exactly. She was capturing rhythm, how her mother taught, how women leaned in, how knowledge moved without shouting. Her first podcast would be about this. Not the courtroom, not the scandal. Just this quiet moment where truth settled like dust and stayed. Outside, kids chased each other around the swing set built near the edge of the forest line. Their laughter rose over the treetops. One boy, muddy knees and wild hair, stopped beside a thick tree trunk and pointed at the scar spiraling around its midsection. "Miss Callan," he called through the open window, "how come that tree got cut and didn't die?" She stepped out, brushing her hands on her jeans, following his gaze. The oak stood firm, though its middle was visibly hollowed, a wound years old. Moss had crept into the cracks. One branch arched toward the sky like a bent elbow holding its ground. "That tree," she said gently, "didn't leave its roots. That's why." The boy blinked up at her. "It stayed," she added, "even when it hurt. That's how it kept growing." He nodded, not fully understanding, but he would someday. Later that evening, the sky turned the color of worn-out denim. Inside the cabin, Callan and May cleaned up together, in a rhythm that had grown familiar, passing plates, folding chairs, laughing without needing a punchline. No ceremony. Just daily peace stitched slowly from chaos. Callan wiped her hands, glancing toward the bookshelf they'd salvaged from the old cabin ruins. Wedged between copies of The People's History and Silent Spring, a charred sliver of wood sat in a glass jar. Still scorched, still quiet. May walked over to the window and set down a small oil lamp, old-fashioned glass, slightly chipped wick already trimmed. She struck a match with calm hands and lit it. A soft glow shimmered against the pane, catching in her reflection. The flame leaned with the wind, but didn't falter. She adjusted it slightly, then turned to her mother. "I think I'll call the first episode The Root That Stayed." Callan smiled, moved closer, placed a hand on May's back. "That's a good one," she whispered. They stood there a while, watching the lamp sway. Somewhere beyond the trees, the moon climbed, like it had every night before. But tonight it looked like it was pausing just briefly to listen in. Nothing more needed saying. No grand closing line. Just the sound of the wind brushing past the window and a warm flickering light that refused to go out. Sometimes healing doesn't look like justice. It looks like staying, like speaking up even when no one's listening yet, like raising a child to be brave in the dark. Callan Rise didn't set out to be a symbol, but she lit a match in a place long forgotten, and others found their way by that light. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and follow us for more emotional stories of strength, memory, and the power of one voice that refused to disappear.